გამარჯობა, ბატონო ელჩო, ძალიან დიდი მადლობა რადიოში და ჩვენს სტუდიაში მოგზაურობისთვის მოხარულები ვართ, რომ გამონახეთ ჩვენთვის დრო.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for having me here. It's a great pleasure to visit Radio Ათინათი, and I hope that your audience will also receive good impressions about the work of EU monitoring mission here in Georgia.
სექტემბერში 14 წელი სრულდება ევროკავშირის სადამკვირვებლო მისიის საქართველოში დაწყებიდან, დაგროვდა საკმაოდ დიდი გამოცდილება, გარდა გამყოფ ხაზთან პატრულირებისა, როგორც იცის უკვე მოსახლეობამ, დამკვირვებლების საქმიანობა მოიცავს სხვადასხვა აქტივობას. მინდა გთხოვოთ კიდევ ერთხელ შევახსენოთ ჩვენს მსმენელებს, მაყურებლებს, თუ რა არის მისიის მიზანი და აი ამ საქმიანობის მიმართულებები.
Yes, indeed. In September this year, we mark 14 years since the establishment of our mission, and on the 1st of October 2008, we started actually our monitoring activities in Georgia, including here in Zugdidi, where we have one of our 3 field offices. Since the start of our work here in Georgia, we have the same mandate. It is composed of 4 elements: support for stabilization, normalization, confidence building across administrative boundary lines, and informing EU policy. And within those 4, as we call them, lines of operation, we focus our attention not only on monitoring the situation along the administrative boundary lines with Abkhazia and South Ossetia, but also we try to find out what is the situation, humanitarian situation of the conflict-affected communities. This is mainly our human security monitoring. And also we visit the units of the Georgian Defense Forces, Ministry of Internal Affairs, in order to establish contacts and also find out what is the situation and their activities. Within our confidence building activities, we also operate a hotline that is the main channel of communication across administrative boundary lines, so between Tbilisi and Sukhumi, between Tbilisi and Tskhin Valley, and this is very frequently used, let's say, tool of communication and confidence building. Another example of confidence building efforts is incident prevention and response mechanism, the format that brings together parties from both sides of the ABL, administrative boundary line, where we try to resolve practical issues related to the situation on the ground. Unfortunately, the IPRM Gali for Abkhaz theater is on hold already for 4 years, but we continue, and I co-chair the meetings of the Ergneti IPRM that is devoted to the South Ossetian theater.
ხო, აი მეც ზუსტად დამასწრო ბატონმა ელჩმა და მინდოდა ეს კითხვა დამესვა. როლექსში მინდა კითხოთ, რამდენად გაიზარდა ადმინისტრაციული საზღვრის ორივე მხარეს მყოფი მოსახლეობა, მეორე მხარეზე ვერ ვიტყვით, მაგრამ ადმინისტრაციულ ხაზთან მცხოვრები მოსახლეობის ნდობა მისიის მიმართ და რამდენად მნიშვნელოვანია ეს მისიისთვის.
Yes, this is a very good question, because we conduct regular surveys of opinions, trying to find out what is the perception of our activities. And I'm happy to say that we receive very high notes from our interlocutors, mainly people living along the ABL, conflict-affected communities. Firstly, they recognize us, so they know about our existence. On the other hand, they positively, very positively assess our work and our contribution to the stabilization and normalization on the ground. We also work with many civil society organizations and individual activists. So with them we implement a number of projects, including those financed from our special confidence building facility that is relatively small fund, but it allows us to implement very well targeted projects that bring together actors from both sides of the ABL, and they increase the level of trust across ABL.
დავამატებ მედიის კუთხით სადამკვირვებლო მისიის და ევროკავშირის მხარდაჭერას. უშუალოდ ჩვენ გვაქვს მხარდაჭერა და იმ პროექტებისა, რომლებიც აი ნდობის გაღრმავებისკენ არის მიმართული. ქართულ აფხაზურ პროექტებზეა საუბარი და დიდი მადლობა ამისთვის. და რა თქმა უნდა, გალის შეხვედრებზე მინდა გკითხოთ, თქვენ ახსენეთ ერგნეთის შეხვედრები, რომლებიც განახლდა გამომდინარე არსებული სიტუაციისა, უკრაინის კრიზისისა, რეგიონში არსებული ურთულესი გეოპოლიტიკური მდგომარეობისა, რამდენად რეალურად მიგაჩნიათ ამ გალის შეხვედრების საკითხის წინ წამოწევა, რამდენად რეალურია ეს და როგორი არის მისი ვთქვათ განახლების პერსპექტივები ამ შეხვედრების. და დავამატებ რამდენად ეფექტიანი შეიძლება იყოს ახლა ეს ფორმატი.
I think that it is our firm position that this instrument is absolutely necessary, especially in the current, as you said, situation around Georgia, but also in breakaway regions. We need the format of direct dialogue. Even if the situation along the administrative boundary lines remains right now relatively stable and calm, there is still potential of escalation and negative development. So this is why instruments that were created in order to prevent such incidents are of utmost importance. So we support the resumption of Gali IPRM meetings. We work closely with our UN colleagues in order to bring participants back to the table, but I know that some differences, technical issues still remain an obstacle, and we hope that finally all the stakeholders, they will realize that it is in their interest actually to have such regular meetings in place.
მე გავაგრძელებ თემას ევროკავშირის სადამკვირვებლო მისიის მანდატით მისიას შეუძლია საქართველოში, მთელ საქართველოში მის აღიარებულ საერთაშორისო აღიარებულ ფარგლებში მუშაობა, მაგრამ სოხუმი და ცხინვალი ეწინააღმდეგებიან მისიის ოკუპირებულ ტერიტორიებზე მუშაობას. აი ამ თემის გააქტიურების პერსპექტივა თუ არსებობს და როგორ უყურებთ ბატონო ელჩმა?
Yes, this is one of the main obstacles for the full implementation of our mandate, that we do not have physical access to the other side of the ABL. And we understand that this is political decision, but we keep underlining and we try to remind all the decision makers that our mandate, original mandate, agreed in 2008, covers entire territory of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. So it is a kind of paradox, yes, that we are supposed to monitor the implementation of six-point agreement entered, signed by Russia and Georgia, mediated by the European Union, where signatories agreed to have monitoring mechanism. And we are the only international monitoring presence on the ground. So this is the obligation of the signatories of this original agreement to allow us to implement our mandate to its full extent. So if you ask about perspectives, I think it's difficult to predict in the current very dynamic geopolitical situation in the region, but I think we should remind Russia is in non-compliance with the six-point agreement because they failed to withdraw armed forces from the territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, despite the commitment made in the six-point agreement, that the agreements that they signed, they should be implemented in good spirit. Yes, because this is the basic principle of international relations.
უკვე თქვენს პირად გამოცდილებას ეხება ეს კითხვა, თქვენ საკმაოდ რთულ პერიოდში მოგიწიათ საქართველოში ყოფნა ამ პოზიციაზე. მთავარი პრობლემები, რომლის წინაშეც აღმოჩნდა, საერთოდ მისია და ზოგადად რა პრობლემები იყო, მთავარი გამოწვევები და ვთქვათ, როგორ მთავარი წარმატებებიც ალბათ ამ პერიოდის განმავლობაში, როგორ დაიძლია ეს.
Thank you. So it's not an easy question to answer. I think I had slightly different plans and priorities when I arrived to Georgia in March 2020, starting my work as the head of UMM Georgia. It coincided with the outbreak of COVID pandemic, and it totally changed the list of priorities, and we had to learn by doing how to adapt to the changing circumstances, COVID restrictions, mitigating measures. But I'm happy to say that we as the mission, we showed our resilience. We maintained during even the hardest periods of pandemic our visible presence at the administrative boundary lines and our operational activities. So it was the main priority at that time. Another kind of factor that is affecting our operational environment is the situation in the neighborhood of Georgia, both southern neighborhood, namely the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Over 2 years ago we had this Karabakh war. Now we have another wave of hostilities, but this year primary Russian aggression against Ukraine. So this is a big change in European security. For the first time since Second World War, we have direct aggression of one state against another state, and this has to also affect our activities. So we intensified our early warning capabilities. We enhanced our analytical work in order to be able to quickly react to any potential development in our area of responsibility.
და ბოლოს რო შევაჯამოთ ეს ყველაფერი, მაინც ისევ ზოგადად საქართველოს შესახებ მინდა კითხოთ, არსებული გეოპოლიტიკური ცვლილებების ფონზე რა გამოწვევების წინაშე დგას საქართველო და რა არის მნიშვნელოვანი, მათ შორის მისიის მონაწილეობით რეგიონში სტაბილურობის ხელშეწყობის თვალსაზრისით.
We consider our presence here in Georgia as EU contribution and commitment to the stability and security of Georgia, but also of the wider region. This is our mission is one of the biggest civilian missions of the European Union, with substantial human resources, financial resources, and it enjoys broad political support among EU member states, which is demonstrated, for example, in the representation of 26 out of 27 EU member states among our staff members. So this fourth line of operation that are mentioned, informing EU policy, we try to contribute by our reportings, findings, observations to the formulation of bigger strategy, EU policy vis-à-vis this region, but also broader continent and broader neighborhood of the European Union. This is why we are hosting so many visitors in our mission, including here in field office Zugdidi. We receive bilateral ambassadors, European ambassadors from other countries like United States, for example, but also high-level officials. Last year I hosted at Denguri Bridge President of Ukraine, Zelensky. So it was still before the war, but he showed great interest to the situation at the ABL, the living conditions of the residents of Gali district, because he identified many similarities to the situation of the occupied part of Ukraine, Donbas. So the war in Ukraine affects everybody. So countries in the European Union, our neighbors like Georgia, so we can see it with our own eyes when we see refugees coming from Ukraine that are welcomed in our countries. When we see redirection of transit routes, you see the flow of trailers entering Georgia because they need to bypass the area of conflict. When we see also some impact on the supply chain, export, import of different goods, or even some potential shortages of some goods because of the blockade of Ukrainian ports, they were not able to export some agricultural products. So this is something that is resonating very widely, and I'm afraid we have to live with the consequences of this Russian unprovoked aggression against Ukraine for still foreseeable future. But I think it's important to maintain also regional and internal stability and resilience. So to be able to withstand potential threats, potential risks, and to eliminate vulnerabilities in order to prevent some hostile or malicious activities from outside, from abroad. So in conclusion to this question, my answer to this question, so it is strong commitment of the European Union to maintain the presence of the EUMM Georgia also as the tool of conflict prevention. Yes, to not allow, the conflict in Ukraine to expand and to spill over to the territories of breakaway regions.
Ჩვენს ამ იმედით დავასრულებთ დღეს თქვენთან საუბარს. ძალიან დიდი მადლობა სტუმრობისთვის და იმისთვის, რომ გამონახეთ ჩვენთვის დრო წარმატებებს გისურვებთ ბატონო ელჩა.